Hello, my name is Jason Lauve, and I'm a cannabis advocate. I've been working with the cannabis plant for many years, with hemp, with ganja, with cannabis sativa L. It's all the same thing, right? Many people think that these are different things, but the reason is because politicians, politics, lobbyists, and all these other exterior entities have convinced themselves and many other people that we need to break this plant apart into hemp and ganja, the leaves, the seed, the fiber, the flower. And they're using these arbitrary references to determine how to separate these pieces. And so, for example, many people talk about hemp being defined as the cannabis sativa L plant having less than 0.3% THC in the United States. This may be different in other countries. In Mexico, it could be 1%. In Thailand, it's different. In Italy, it's different. And so we don't have a standard. We don't have a baseline that we can all work from. The problem with using THC as a definition for hemp or marijuana or any division point is this number, 0.3%, that came up in the United States is actually arbitrary. It was derived from a man named Dr. Ernest Small in Canada in the 70s. And if you look at his work, he directly acknowledges that this is an arbitrary reference. And I would argue that if you really look at the plant and how it functions, THC is something that is a decarboxylated THC acid. And so the plant makes THC acid, but it needs to be converted through using heat to convert that molecule into THC. And so many of the testing components that we see out there are using machines that are using heat to get the test results. Unfortunately, when you use heat, as I just mentioned, it's changing the molecule. And so the results are not honest. They're manipulated. This is nonsense, non-science. If we really want to get an accurate test, we need to use accurate equipment. And I can talk to you about all the specific names and all these details, but I just wanted to give you an understanding of the overview of the problems that we're seeing. So many of the people that are involved in cannabis are from other industries. They're politicians, they're from the music industry, they have business backgrounds, they're investors, and the list is long from these people that are coming from other arenas. Many of the people, as we know, that have experience with cannabis, with marijuana, if you have a felony, if you've been arrested for possessing marijuana or for selling marijuana or for growing marijuana in the past, many of the legislation components that have been written exclude all of us from these opportunities, which doesn't make sense. We're the ones with the experience. Many of the people that have the experience with this plant have been marginalized. People that have been working together to try and move this forward have been separated. And so, unfortunately, we're seeing a very confusing arena of information. There's a lot of dishonest people in cannabis and hemp that are using their relationships and their networks with politicians, or they're using money. You can call it bribery, you can call it whatever you want, but it is corruption in some sort of another, where people are not using the plant itself, the science itself, the truth, and so on and so forth, the history behind this plant, to move this forward. And this is not surprising to me, because a lot of people want to take control of the opportunities that we see in front of us. Here's an example. We're coming out of what we have all called the drug war, but the drug war is still going on. It's just 2.0, it's a new version. And the way I see this is that the ideal situation in the beginning is we wanted to free the plant. We wanted to make sure that everything was legalized so that cannabis, marijuana, THC, these words would be removed from legislation. Unfortunately, what's happened is they're kind of playing musical chairs. As the music is playing, they're making everybody dance, and they're taking away a chair one song at a time. And as they do this, you and I are losing what we came out here to fight for, what we found helped us. So in my situation, I broke my back in 2004 in a ski accident that somebody hit me in. And I used the cannabis plant for pain, for muscle spasms, for nausea, with a lot of the medications that I was taking at the time. And this is not a random thing where I decided to go, hey, let's go ahead and try cannabis. My neurologist in Colorado Springs actually suggested that I try using cannabis, not just smoking it, but eating it, using it as a topical to control my pain and other problems. And what I found is by using the plant and eating it, it behaved differently in my body. I was able to reduce the amount of opioids, Oxycontin, and other pharmaceutical drugs so that I can start to think properly and think better. A lot of those opioid medications are actually causing many problems for many people. They're very addictive. The dosages that doctors are giving to people are way too high, and there's many reasons for this. They trace back to the pharmaceutical companies, for example, saying that the dose of oxycodone was X amount, but in reality, it was 50% stronger. And so the doctors, whether knowing or not, were overprescribing. And so that's another big problem that we're facing. But what happened with me is I started to realize that my pain was being addressed by using the cannabis plant. And so eating oils, aceite de cannabis, cannabis oils, they started to give me a more even and long-lasting pain control. And so I wasn't getting these massive pain spikes when I was using the cannabis plant and eating it. Were there side effects? Some people would argue that you get high. That's a relative reference. What does high mean? You can say that people get high on other drugs, people get high on life, people get high on marijuana, but there's no real definition to what that is. It's another stereotype that's put in front of people to say, oh, you just want to get high. No, I want to thrive. I want to be able to do my work. I love my work. I love talking to people. I want to be able to walk and enjoy my life. This is not about sitting on a couch getting stoned and being a couch potato, which is another stereotype. And you guys know this. So what's really important is to recognize that these references about the definition of THC being, the definition of hemp being less than 0.3% THC, please look into where those numbers come from. Why are these politicians using these numbers? Who is influencing the politicians, and what are they using? In other words, are there briberies involved? Is there coercion? Is there a gift of partnership and a business that could be created when the legislation or these politicians agree to vote for or use this language that other people have put in front of them? When I read a lot of the legislation out there, there's a lot of manipulative language. And so, for example, many people are now looking at the definition of hemp as total cannabinoids or total tetrahydrocannabinols in the plant. The problem is if you look at the actual definition that was created in the Farm Bill, which I argue is invalid because it's unscientific, it's an arbitrary number. Again, coming back to Dr. Ernest Small in Canada, he openly says in his work in the 70s that this is an arbitrary number. The other thing that we also know about is that with more CBD, with other cannabinoids, THC, or the effect of THC, is reduced. And so there are other definitions that have been used. For example, there's a ratio that is out there that we can talk about in detail another time, but that ratio looks at a breaking point, I'll call it. And so if you have a graph where you have THC on one side and CBD on another, if you start to look at where that 0.3% THC number is, it's very, very far down on the charts. And so it's excluding many potential cultivars of hemp that could be used for food and fiber, building materials, remediation projects, and the list goes on. Unfortunately, what has been done is this 0.3% number forces people to either be excluded from the industry because they don't have access to this cultivars, or they don't have the money to create a breeding program to keep breeding these seeds or these cultivars so that they stay below this 0.3% THC number. Now, if you look at this other definition that's out there, it talks about the ratio. And so it's a below 1 or above 1 ratio. In other words, if you take THC and put it in a ratio above CBD, if that ratio is less than 1, in other words, if there's more CBD than THC, so for an example, you can have 11% THC and a 12% CBD plant, and that would fall under the ratio of 1. That would be counted as a fiber type cannabis plant. Above that 1-to-1 ratio would be medicinal. And the reason is there's a lot of research that is showing that when you have a majority of CBD, it overrides the THC, and you don't have that psychoactive or a high feeling that a lot of people talk about. And if you look at products from GW Pharmaceuticals, for example, some of their products fit this definition between a 1-to-1 ratio and a 1-to-20 ratio, which happens to fit in that area of the graph that I'm talking about. Now, another interesting thing to see when you look at the graphing of existing cultivars of cannabis or hemp or any of these words that are used, which are essentially the same plant, is you'll notice that the natural tendency, the natural behavior of the cannabis plant is to produce somewhere in the range of this graph, but it's above the 0.3% number and below that number 1 ratio, that 1-to-1 ratio I was talking about. And what's fascinating about this is that you don't need to be in a breeding program. You don't have to have those certified seeds. Now, why do we have certification? Why are people using the certification? Well, because it can guarantee the farmer's success. It can guarantee that, and I put quotes around guarantee, but it can, majority of the time, make sure that those seeds are going to stay within the range that are predicted, that are expected based on the breeding program and development of that cultivar. And that is completely understandable. But why do we have this threat looming over our heads if that THC number starts to creep up? That doesn't make sense. Number one, because the testing machines that are being used are not appropriate, because they're using heat and changing that THC acid into THC artificially. So in other words, the government is manufacturing the THC by using that testing machine. If you use other machines, there's other available scientific equipment that can give you accurate readings. And so this is really just about a choice that an entity has chosen. I don't know who this is or where this is coming from or why. I can guess. And I would propose that this is coming from law enforcement or people against marijuana or cannabis or people who want to control or limit the industry to just certain people. And so we need to go back to science and find the true answers and answer the questions appropriately so that the data that we achieve is accurate. And so we need to use testing equipment that does not change the THC acid into THC during the testing process. And what this will do is start to reveal that many, many more cultivars can be used, and that we can also start having the conversation about how to handle the number THC, or what this is for. So for example, I do agree that we should be very concerned about how much THC ends up in food. And so we need to think about what is the plant doing and how are we treating the plant if we're starting to put it into food products. But if we're going to be making building materials, or if we're doing a remediation project, absorbing the contaminants out of a soil, or if we're wearing clothes, like my hemp vest here, then we really shouldn't be using this 0.3% THC limitation to restrict us from using a plant that has so many other benefits aside from just smoking and consuming for food. And so I understand that people want to destroy THC, but don't destroy the whole plant. There are other methods that we can utilize to take advantage of, as is being used in many parts of this growth of the opportunities with the cannabis plant, that we can convert that THC to something else. We can break it down to CBN, for example, which is a great other opportunity. But it's ridiculous to sit here and have these conversations amongst ourselves and amongst the politicians and amongst the public to say, here's an absolute limit, and if we go above that, then you are either fined, you lose your farm, and yes, there is some legislation that protects this from happening, but I want to remind you that in the system of law, you have to have an intent to break the law. And I would argue that people that are growing the cannabis plant, whether it's for medicinal purposes, for food, for building materials, for remediation, their intent, my intent, our intent, is to utilize this plant for good things. It's not to be a criminal. It's not to go behind people's back and try and sell this on the streets and make people sick. Our intent in the beginning, for many of us, was to help people. I learned that the plant helped myself, and so after I started to learn these things, I started to publish Cannabis Health News magazine many years ago to get this truth out. Unfortunately, what happened to me is I got raided by the police in 2008. They broke down the door into my house, they destroyed many things, they took many things, and they charged me with things that I didn't do. I was trying to help myself, I was trying to heal myself based on what my doctor told me and what my research was, and what I learned from many people around me. Many physicians taught me what they knew, many research scientists taught me what they knew. Thank you for many of those people. Dr. Robert Melamede, Dr. Donald Abrams, Dr. David Bierman. There's so many people that really have contributed to teaching me and teaching all of us what this plant really can do for us. So what I really want to get across to you is that you can take action. I can take action, and I have, and I do every single day to try and educate people about the truth and research and science that exists about this plant. And if you look around, you can see what this is doing. It's helping kids with epilepsy. It's helping grandparents regain some memory with Alzheimer's and be able to talk to their kids again. It's allowing people like myself to walk. I wake up every day now, and it's like a miracle to me because I have functions of my leg and I don't have the pain that I used to have. I still have the pain, but I'm able to control it, and I'm able to thrive in my life instead of just barely survive on the medications and pharmaceutical drugs that I was put on. And that has a whole other history behind it. So when we look at the people who are really doing what they can do best to help those around them, that's what the essence of this plant is for. It's not to control the plant and restrict the people who have access and restrict the people that are allowed to have licenses into these businesses and pay exorbitant amounts of money for licensing to get into these programs, or to be controlled by entities like the FDA. And I'm not saying that we don't need safety behind what we're producing for food and topicals and other consumables for our health, for our bodies. We have those protections. We already have laws in place that protect you and me from contamination of foods. But when we start bringing the FDA into the picture, as we see with CBD, for example, their intention, or I would argue the people that are coaching them, their intention is to take this molecule and own it so that you cannot use it anymore. But this is from hemp. This is from the cannabis sativa plant. For thousands of years, this plant has been used. Just until recently, in the 1930s, it was taken from us with a lie, with people who had bad intent. This is the criminal intent that I mentioned earlier. They're the criminals who made this plant illegal. And then in 1969, Timothy Leary came along and was arrested for marijuana, and he fought this. He stood up because he knew that he was right. This is what you can do. When all of us do this, we can make a big change. When two people speak up, more people listen. The first person usually is the crazy guy, but the second person becomes the leader. And when that leader steps up and repeats what that crazy guy says, many people come to follow. And so when Timothy Leary fought this court case, Leary versus the United States in 1969, he demonstrated that 1937 Tax Act, the Marijuana Tax Act, was unconstitutional. So we didn't have any regulations or laws for a period of time until Nixon, Tricky Dick, a liar, came along and created this controlled substances program, the controlled drugs. And yes, many of those drugs are dangerous, but cannabis isn't one of them. He even did some research. He asked somebody to do some digging into regards to what this plant did to our society and how it affects us. He came back with his research and showed Mr. Dick that it wasn't causing any harm, that there was no reason to have a restriction around this. But Nixon went ahead and did it anyway. So again, we were lied to by a system that we can change. If we continue to sit back and hide behind our screens without actually going into the Capitol or protesting or physically being present, the system will take control. If you look at Colorado's history and how we got to where we are today, we used to go to protest on the steps of the Capitol. We would yell at the police. We would proclaim our constitutional rights. We would smoke and be the stereotype in front of everybody. But what it did is it showed that we were present. It showed that we would take action. Now we see very little protests. We see a lot of police control. We see sheriff's departments and police departments testifying against this plant based on their own bizarre belief system. They're not using science. All they want to do is put money in their pocket. And if you think it's something else, then maybe I'm completely lost, but I think you're lost. Money controls many people. And so now we have taxes on cannabis. You can go to the store and buy your little bag of weed and walk out after paying 20, 30, 40, 50% more because they've added these excise tax, the sin tax. And so the cost of that cannabis, that flower, that medicine, the medicinal value of that plant has now been exponentially increased. To put money in people's pockets, to exclude other people from entering this industry or this business or the opportunities that are in front of them, to penalize farmers for growing a plant that accidentally goes above THC when the normal behavior of the plant is to be above that 0.3% THC. So people now still, oh, the black market, oh, the black market. Yeah, all right, the black market. I'm glad it's still there, because what it's showing is the people that are manipulating this industry are greedy as fuck. If they really cared about you, and if they really cared about people's access, the prices would be accessible. You wouldn't be finding an empty bottle of CBD for $60. It'd be $5. And there'd actually be the right amount of CBD in the bottle for people who need to use this 1 drop or 2 drops or 3 drops at a time, not 1 or 2 or 3 droppers at a time, or the whole bottle for argument's sake. So the intent, I thought, was to free the plant. Take the words marijuana, cannabis, hemp, and THC out of all legislative language. Existing, pre-existing, or if anybody has any idea to write this in the future, don't use it anymore. Take it out. Remove that legalization. Legalization just brings more control, more policing, more regulations. It's not what you think it is. This is a trick. So if you took away all those excise taxes, if you took away all that excessive pricing and brought this material, this plant back down to what it should cost, then you would affect the black market. Then there wouldn't be competition, because then the price would be so low that the black market wouldn't be able to function. In reality, I think the black market is a free market. It's operating under its own constraints or non-constraints. Whereas when we look at the structure that's been built today, you can't have a felon within 10 years. You have to pay X amount for licensing. You have to have a seed that's certified. Da 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 da. No, that's not freedom. That's manipulation. And many people have bowed down and accepted this. And many people that I knew that were fighting for this plant in the beginning have bowed down and accepted this. And many of you who chose to bow down and accept this also know the truth of how all this took place. You also know that people are being marginalized that shouldn't have been. You also know that many of the people that got you here have been pushed aside. And we know who they are. There's a huge list of wonderful people who are struggling to continue to fight for the rights of you, of the patients, and everybody else on this planet to have access to a natural plant. Now, I brought up a couple months ago a reference to, does the FDA control water? And I was trying to fish for some answers. Yeah, they control water once it's put into a plastic bottle. They control water when it comes out of your tap. But if you walk in the mountains and you stumble across a stream, there's no sign there that says, go ask the FDA before you touch this. There's no fence around this. There's no police officer saying, show me that you have all the paperwork so you can operate a business and take a sip from that spring. So what I'm getting at here is the cannabis plant needs to be available for everybody, and it is. The problem is all these little pieces, these nuances that have been put in the middle of the truth are preventing us from getting to the truth. So each person that's still suffering today from being arrested or incarcerated is because you're not doing anything. Many of the people that you listen to on this channel today, or yesterday or tomorrow, are speaking essentially the same thing. And I want you to listen to the SDZ.today website and what all the other advocates are saying about this plant. I have many, many, many references, and I'll be coming back to speak more about what I see as a problem in the industry and what I've experienced. And I'll share a story with you before I go. I was one of the big contributors to the first hemp legislation in Colorado in 2012. Representative Wes McKinley was the sponsor of this bill initially, and then we added many other great representatives and senators from the state of Colorado to support this bill. And it was successful unanimously in every hearing, every administrative hearing and floor hearing. But Wes McKinley also is a very compassionate man. And when he had listened to my conversation about the potentials of hemp, he saw an opportunity to create this legislation. I met Wes McKinley in front of the state capitol in Colorado during the beginning of Occupy Wall Street. And I had a tent pitched on the front lawn under a full moon that night in front of the capitol. And Wes McKinley pitched his teepee, a cowboy teepee, in front of the capitol as well, next to my tent. And he put out his little cowboy stool and his hat, and if you know him, he's got this really cool handlebar mustache. He's the typical cowboy, if you will. He's also a cowboy poet. He has a heart. He plays music. He sings his soul. But when we talked about hemp that night, I shared with him my views. And we had a great conversation. And I woke up the next morning and he was gone. I didn't think anything of it. Occupy continued. We were assaulted, shot at, beaten up by the police, abused, threatened. Some were tortured. But we persisted. We didn't run. I still have close bonds with a lot of those people I met during that resistance, during that free speech opportunity, which was crushed, was destroyed. And it wasn't just one crazy occupation of groups. It was many groups, many people from all walks of life. Yes, we had jobs. But we were out there those days because we saw something more important than just our job. We saw something in front of us that we had to defend. We had to protect our fellow man. There were problems with our food. There are problems with our health department. There are problems with our education system. There are many problems with our policing system. There's many problems with many of the systems in our government and in our country today. But we can't blame each other for them. We need to find solutions and fix them. And so 2 weeks after the day that I met Wes McKinley, I get a phone call. Hey Jason, come into my office. I didn't even ask him why. I was still in the wheelchair at the time, and so I rolled into his office on the day of the appointment, and there's another legislator and 2 other attorneys in the office, and Wes says, as I enter the door, okay, we're going to write a hemp bill today. And in 45 minutes, we had the first draft of the first legally passed legislation for industrial hemp in the state of Colorado. This was part of a bigger strategy. The following year, we implemented a regulatory program that started to address all of the concerns many people had. Unfortunately, I can't do all this myself. And so more and more people started coming into the picture, and more of those people had their own ideas about manipulation and control. The day that the first legislation was due, I was sitting in the basement of the Capitol, the Colorado Capitol, in the cafeteria, going over the final wording of the legislation. And Eric Steenstra from, at the time, Vote Hemp and Hemp Industry Association appears. Hey, how you guys doing? Want to make sure you're all right? And he also wanted to add a paragraph into our legislation that would basically say, we need to have certified seed from Canada. Think about that. Think about the organization that he's supposed to represent at the time and what this implies. So we laughed him off. We said, no way, you got to be kidding me. And what does he do? He goes upstairs to Senator Schwartz's office, Gail Schwartz, and tries the same stunt. Fortunately, she also understands what we're doing, and she also understands the Constitution and 10th Amendment protections and many other protections. But in this case, she understood that the state had rights over the federal government. And this is really important for what's going on today. You still can make a big change. You don't have to follow that federal authority of the Farm Bill. Because if you do, you're going to start to notice that there's some conflicts in the way that was written, and how that creates conflicts with what we're really trying to do, and how it actually supports companies that want to control and manipulate some of these molecules, like CBD. And so we really need to regroup. And again, that's why I'm excited about the SDZ Today program, because we are regrouping. Many of the people that you'll see who are speaking their stories on this channel are essentially fighting for you, so that you can be free. Now, I'm not going to harp on all these groups specifically that have done bad things or manipulated the conversation to control where cannabis and hemp are going. But you have the opportunity to speak with those around you and share these stories and read the actual language about the mission statements of these groups, about who the members are of these groups, what their histories are. There's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of investigative reading to do to find the truth. It's not a simple meme. It's not a simple one-liner or a blip or a snippet that you can get off television that you'll get the whole answer in one short sentence. You need to work. You need to read a lot. You need to think. You need to have conversations. You need to ask questions. You need to use Webster's dictionary. You need to use Black's Law Dictionary for the legal language. We need to work together to address this plant and end the drug war once and for all, not change it. None of us had the idea that when we were talking about legalization or freedom, that we'd be in this position today. Many of us believe still that we can get to the point where we can make sure we have that plant growing in the backyard. Because now I'm seeing situations where you can't grow a CBD plant, but you can sure go to the store and buy it. You can go to the store and buy medical cannabis or medicinal cannabis, because those words are loaded in terms of legal references. But why take away these opportunities and options for somebody else to start a small business or to grow a plant for themselves in their backyard, for themselves or for their children? The other myths that are out there are what this does to your brain, or what this does to your body, or what this does to any number of things. that the stereotypes and the myths have propagated over these years. So I'm kind of babbling at this point. I'm kind of ranting. And I'm happy I'm staying calm about some of these things. Because in my heart, we need to shout. We need to be physical and show our presence. We don't need to be violent. We need to use our words and our writing and videos to speak the truth. I encourage you, please do your research. Please investigate. Please find more information, and don't ignore the parts that look challenging. Don't ignore the parts that say you can't do that. I was told that I can't do that. I was told that the hemp bill wouldn't pass in the beginning. I was also told that during my raid that I wouldn't win my court case. I won my court case. They gave me a box of cannabis back. The reason that all this stuff is happening and we haven't completely accomplished the goal of freeing the plant, it's because we're not supporting each other. I have different ideas, you have different ideas. This is great. But don't let them separate you. Because many of the people that you may disagree with in regards to who are doing the same thing, you also agree on other things. Find those commonalities and we can succeed. My name is Jason Lauve. You can find me at lauve.com, hempcleans.com, globalhemporganization.com, or just search my name, Jason Lauve, and you might be able to find me. So right now, I'm here in Mexico. Hasta luego. Buen día.